Today on The World Today, Japan extends its state of emergency amid the Tokyo Olympics, and China battles its worst COVID-19 outbreak since Wuhan. First person jailed under Hong Kong national security law given 9 years. Plus, first group of evacuated Afghan translators arrive in the United States. Hello and a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Teniola Shibowale. Well, we'll begin with updates from the COVID-19 pandemic. Japan has widened a state of emergency in Tokyo and expanded it to new regions as it faces a surge in cases. Plus, a new COVID-19 outbreak of the Delta variant in China is being described as the worst since Wuhan. Here's more on this and other developments on our COVID-19 Global Update. I'll bring you that report shortly. In the meantime, let's take a look at some other stories. A Hong Kong man has been sentenced to 9 years in prison after he rode a motorbike into police officers while flying a flag with a protest slogan. Tung Ying Kit, whose flag bore the phrase "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," was earlier found guilty of inciting secession and terrorism. He was the first person to be charged under Hong Kong's controversial national security law. Friday's verdict has set the tone for how future cases might be interpreted. More than 100 people have been arrested since the law came into force in 2020.
Up until now, we knew that the national security law was being used to instill fear. But today onwards, we also see that it is going to be used as a weapon to incarcerate people. It is very disturbing because a violation of international human rights law. I think from today onwards, freedom of expression is officially a crime in Hong Kong. It's disturbing to bring about charges of national security for just brandishing a flag. But it is also very disturbing because we fear that this will set a precedent because this particular political symbol is a very popular political symbol used by scores of activists. So it's a very, very worrying trend.
US and international affairs analyst Calvin Dark joins us now for more on this. Calvin, we just heard there Amnesty International saying onwards, this law is going to be used as a weapon, essentially to silence opposition, something China has repeatedly denied. But from your assessment, is this the end of the one country, two systems principle in Hong Kong?
Exactly the end, but what I would say is that the protesters, from 2019 and then through last year, they weren't just, exaggerating this. They have been protesting, saying that this national security law would have the effect of silencing opposition, quashing dissent. And with this case, with this verdict, we're seeing that their suspicions weren't overblown. So I don't think it's quite the end yet because I think they're still fighting. And I think the international community has a lot that it can do. But I think that this is a very predictable step that we all saw over the last 2 years.
Of what the international community can do, we also have to bear in mind that China has repeatedly spoken against foreign interference in the region. What more do you think the international community can do here without stepping on China's toes and worsening an already fragile relationships all around?
Well, it's going to be difficult. And if we think about from the international side, for example, with the United States, with the Biden administration, more so than the Trump administration, they're going to include these human rights threats to freedom of speech and protest and association. They're going to include that in their dealings with China to some extent, although the economics is going to take precedence over that. Also, I think private sector companies who might be subject to punishment under this law for things they may allow on their platforms, they'll also help, provide that kind of support for those protesting. But I also think that China is going to continue to insist that this is a domestic internal problem and that it's nobody else's business. So that's going to be a tough dynamic to defeat.
All right, then, U.S. and international affairs analyst Calvin Dark, thank you so much for your thoughts on the program.
Thank you.
Well, let's switch our focus back to the COVID-19 pandemic now, and let's take a look at the latest developments from around the world.
Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga warns that infections are spreading at an unprecedented rate, urging the country to watch the Tokyo Games from home. New cases are being fueled by the more infectious Delta variant. A state of emergency has been extended in the country. Over in China, a COVID outbreak first discovered in the Chinese city of Nanjing has spread to 5 provinces and Beijing, with state media calling it the most extensive contagion after Wuhan. Almost 200 people have been infected since the virus was first detected at the city's busy airport on July the 20th. All flights from Nanjing Airport have been suspended until August the 11th. Israel's former Prime Minister and head of the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu, has received a 3rd shot of coronavirus vaccine as the country kicks off a campaign to give booster doses to people aged over 60 as part of efforts to slow the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant.
I'd like to update you that the expert committee at the Ministry of Health of Israel officially approved the recommendation of giving a 3rd booster dose of the COVID vaccine to Israeli citizens above the age of 60. The decision was based on considerable research and analysis, as well as the rise in risk of the Delta variant wave.
Israel was a world leader in the vaccination rollout, and around 57% of the 9.3 million population has been double vaccinated. But daily new infections have spiked to more than 2,000, up from a handful of cases per day a few months ago, and about 160 people are currently hospitalized with severe symptoms. Speaking of vaccination, South Korea has announced the plans to expand its coronavirus vaccine rollout to people aged 18 to 49 as the country grapples with record-high daily cases driven mostly by infections in the unvaccinated younger population. Over in Europe, England's chief midwife says more pregnant women should get the vaccine as estimates suggest the majority are unvaccinated. The number of moms-to-be in hospital with the virus is rising, and while uncommon, severe illness with COVID is more likely in later pregnancy. And finally, Australia has deployed hundreds of soldiers to Sydney to help enforce a COVID lockdown. A Delta outbreak, which began in June, has produced nearly 3,000 infections and led to 9 deaths.
To the Afghanistan conflict now, about 200 Afghan translators and their families have arrived in the U.S., the first of a group of 2,500 Afghans being evacuated as the Taliban advances. The interpreters are being resettled under a visa program for those who work with the U.S. during the recently ended 20-year war with the Taliban. They're expected to stay there for around a week while they are being processed that stay at the Fort Lee military base in Virginia.
I'm pleased to report that the first flight of Operation Allies Refuge that departed Kabul yesterday landed in the United States nearly 3 hours ago. Our Afghan partners and their families on that flight will arrive later this morning, East Coast time, at Fort Lee, Virginia. For months, we and our colleagues in Washington have worked to speed up everything we could in the SIV process.
Well, our Washington, D.C. correspondent Maria Bird joins us now for more. Maria, this is the first of a group of 2,500 Afghans being evacuated as the Taliban advances in the country. Just speak to us about their arrival and when the rest are expected in the U.S.
Yes, thank you for having me. The rest are expected in the U.S. over the coming months. We are a little over 200 that were brought in most recently, and we know that there are about 2,500 altogether that will obviously be brought over. Those were those individuals that were cooperating and working with the U.S. government early during the war. And so we know that these individuals will be here residing right near the Washington, D.C. area, not too far away, within a couple hours of the D.C. area. So, and they will be on military bases. And so this is kind of the beginning, I think, of a promise that the U.S. has had with these individuals for quite some time, knowing that as the Taliban advances, their lives are obviously in danger. And so coming here will give them some sort of refuge.
In a statement, U.S. President Joe Biden called the arrivals a milestone and the first of many as U.S. authorities work to relocate Afghans out of harm's way. But what exactly has been put in place to accommodate them?
So they will be staying in the military base hotel accommodations for about a week. Then they will be going off into permanent housing while they do the processing period. That's what they'll be doing for this first week, processing, getting themselves situated, having their visa statuses updated for the U.S. and ensuring that they're able to obviously go through as they move forward and move to the different areas across the U.S. We're not expecting that they all will stay in Virginia. They probably will be placed throughout the country, but they'll be set up with all of the necessary things, shelter, food, obviously some financial support in the beginning, and then obviously helping them to just settle in and to hopefully be able to have a lasting, long life here in the U.S.
The Taliban have been advancing in Afghanistan following that decision by President Biden to withdraw the remaining American troops from the country. Some have accused the president of rushing this withdrawal, but how do Americans feel about this?
Well, yes. I mean, rushing the withdrawal has obviously been the topic of discussion, but it's really pretty much been stated, and many Americans, I think, aren't quite following this, that this is going to be more of a paper kind of process. We will still see Americans in Afghan and in the region, but they will no longer be considered troops. You will see them moving to other types of support roles, advisor roles, to stay on the ground and support. So you might see a switching out of personnel, and it really will be just title changes, and the actual type of work that they will be doing will be very similar to what has been done over the last few years. So I think we will still see a heavy presence of the U.S. In Afghanistan. It will just be that they will no longer be official troops. They will be working more in an advisement role and a support role to the Afghan government.
All right, then, Maria, a lot to keep our eyes on. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come on the program. IOC's president praises Tokyo 2020 as signal of hope amid pandemic. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Well, away from the Olympics, 70 years ago on July the 28th, the Refugee Convention was born, a key international treaty establishing the rights of people forced to flee and the emergence of the UN Refugee Agency to protect those rights. 26 million global refugees later, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Filippo Grandi, says the convention continues to protect the rights of refugees across the world. And at an event commemorating its platinum anniversary in Lagos, the UNHCR, alongside its partners, acknowledged that more work still needs to be done.
And Africa. And the numbers of those in need.
It's been 70 years of successes and challenges for an agency set up to meet the needs of the casualties of Europe's wars, but that has expanded since the Second World War to reach almost every nation in the world.
When I started working for UNHCR over 20 years ago, the number of refugees in the world was actually decreasing. And I was thinking, maybe someday there won't be any more refugees in the world. Maybe I can go home and find another job. But fast forward to the Arab Spring and the rise of repressive governments in the world. Syria, millions displaced internally or crossing the borders into Turkey. I think Turkey is the largest refugee hosting country in the world now. Jordan, Greece, and further beyond in Europe.
This event in Lagos, small as it may be because of COVID-19 protocols, is one of the many held around the world to mark the anniversary of the 1951 convention.
Here in Lagos Island.
Later, a panel of discussants take on a review of the agency's roles and domestication of it in Nigeria.
Our experience in Nigeria has not been very, very rosy when it comes to the protection of the rights of refugees. Because the law has been domesticated, Nigerian courts do not hesitate to ensure that justice is meted out to victims of persecution, political persecution.
Nigeria government has the legal framework for the protection of refugees in Nigeria. And to add more to that, it has the institutional authority, National Commission for Refugees, for management of refugees and IDPs in Nigeria. It has further again capacity, manpower that are on ground in handling a situation of this nature.
Civil society and humanitarian organizations are present here. As founder Wellbeing Foundation, Mrs. Bukola Saraki speaks on the importance of philanthropy in helping refugees resettle.
The world of philanthropy today looks at a situation, looks at where government may wish to go, but does not have the swiftness or the agility or the nimbleness to help. And we can study that data, design a program, put our own money where our mouth is, not because we want to do a permanent solution, but because we want to bring out a best practice model that government can later look at and adopt. So in doing so, we're actually being able to move quite quickly to manage traumas correctly and to minimize further displacement, further infringement of rights, and try to advocate for all the sectors to take the right actions.
While Lagos State Government and Nigeria pride itself as welcoming refugees, those at the event speak their mind. It's one of making new friends and still facing challenges. The UNHCR says it continues to support the Nigerian government and partners with civil society organizations in establishing response platforms. As long as there's a need, they will be here for Nigeria.
And our President Tayyip Erdogan says more than 70 wildfires have broken out across 17 provinces on Turkey's Aegean and Mediterranean coast this week, with 14 still ongoing. The Turkish president says planes from Russia and Ukraine are helping battle the flames, and that Azerbaijan would also send an amphibious plane. The death toll from wildfires on Turkey's southern coast has risen to 4, and firefighters are battling blazes, for a third day after the evacuation of dozens of villages and some hotels. President Erdogan says at least 5 planes, 45 helicopters, drones and 1,080 firefighting vehicles are involved in firefighting efforts at 1,140 sites. And finally on the program, a white dusting of snow has covered cars, streets and highways in the south of Brazil. The rare strong snowfalls left many residents mesmerized by the icy snap. More than 40 cities in the state of Rio do Sul had winter sleet, and at least 33 regions had snow. Many turned out in their winter gear, mobile phone in hand, to document the rare weather event. Authorities have issued warnings of low temperatures. Well, let them enjoy the snow. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenio Lashaboale. Bye for now.